Hi everyone, Wesley here. I hope you all had a great Labor Day weekend. I wanted to quickly share with you, through this period of COVID, I quickly realized many of you are cyclists, as well as fans of just the bike scene in general. Well, I took to it as the opportunity to add another element to the growing Standard H community with the launch of the Standard H Cycle Squad. This initial capsule is comprised of a jersey, bib shorts, a lightweight gilet or vest, and as well as a tech shirt for mountain biking, gravel riding, or off-the-bike training. All of these pieces are made in conjunction with the world-renowned cycling brand Rafa. So for those new to cycling, they've created the apparel for 7 of the last 8 Tour de France winners. So yeah, it's great stuff. I invite you to check it out on the website at standard-h.com/cycle squad. That's CYCLESQUAD. If any of it looks great to you, awesome. All items are currently available for pre-order, and the window is open through Thursday, September 10th at 11 p.m. Pacific Time. Thank you so much for listening, and now let's get to the show. Jeremy Kirkland has somewhat of a storied music and apparel industry past, which in my opinion has served as perfect preparation for his current role as the host of Blamo, a podcast about the world of fashion and the people who shape it. It's honestly one of the few podcasts where I listen to every episode. We talk about his growing up in St. Louis as the son of a musician, as well as his early days as a musician himself in New York City. Jeremy started Blamo with the use of a robust Rolodex and a goal to have fun. He now leads Blamo Media, which is comprised of multiple podcasts hosting some of the most well-known people, globally. Many of you listening to this are probably already familiar with Jeremy, so I was excited to offer us fans a behind-the-scenes look at Blamo and several subjects he obviously doesn't discuss during his own episodes. I think you'll all enjoy the story behind the man of one of the world's largest menswear podcasts, and Jeremy even offers some information about a very special narration project he's working on, so stay tuned for that. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H Podcast. Jeremy, thanks again for taking the time.
For sure.
I clearly know more about you than you know about me, given that I've listened to your episodes of Blamo. Tell me about growing up in St. Louis.
I grew up around like the Ferguson-Florissant area. So, it was like me and my older brother at the time, like in this little condo with my dad, because my dad was in a band a lot of my like early adolescent life.
What kind of band was it?
It was like secular Christian rock.
Okay. So what, just everything in 4/4? Like, what are we talking about here?
No. Okay. All right. So your time signatures. A little bit. Because my dad he was always playing music with his brother and sister, and they were just kind of like doing stuff together. And then my dad went to music school, and then he ended up playing with this band called this guy named Dan Peake, who was in America, right? Like Horse with No Name and all that. So he was playing a bunch with him, and then my dad started his own band, and he was an extremely gifted pianist and singer. Like his range, and the reason why I'm like a little bit like more emo about this stuff right now is because during quarantine, I spent the past, weeks and months uploading all of my dad's music to Spotify.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
Yeah. Because, I had found my dad's health is like rapidly declining, and I had found some of his music, and it's all right. And I was like slowly uploading all of it. And there's a feature with that where you can also add the lyrics. And so I'm like typing all of my dad's lyrics that he wrote, in the 80s, and then uploading all of his music, and then listening to it to make sure that the master of whatever was salvageable from that master is like on there. But yeah, most of my dad's life he was playing music and he was in this band, and my brother and I were just like, like just kids in like this like little kind of neighborhood that was it was not a poor neighborhood, but it was definitely not a very affluent neighborhood. And so we kind of grew up around that, and eventually my dad, I don't know if it was my mom kind of like dropping the pressure of what his kids were doing, or just maybe like how his kids were almost like too happy to see him every time he came home because he was always gone so much.
Right.
That he was like, okay, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And but he did 3 albums. He toured all over the place. Obviously not like massive enough to where like, I'm Gene Simmons' kid type thing.
Right.
But but then he eventually made his way towards as one does, towards like preaching. And then my dad became like this like founding pastor of this now like super church in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, which is like I have my own, we don't even you need about a 400-hour podcast for me to start explaining my own struggles with religion and stuff. But
that's all good.
So
it's all good.
he had started this church for a bit, and then so most of my life I was like I was a pastor's kid. That was it, and it was good. I mean, I would like looking back on it now, especially as like I have a 2-year-old right now. It's funny, and I don't know if you ever feel this, but like as you get older and you start to remember things that happened when you were a little kid, and sometimes you stop and think like, that was super weird, like, or that was awesome, to where like, on Wednesday nights we would go to McDonald's for family fun night.
Okay. They had a place, obviously.
Well, actually this one didn't, but they had cheeseburgers that were 35 cents. And so we would all go, yeah. I mean, this is like 1989, right? 1990 or something, So we would all go as like a family to do it, and it's funny because, like, I never really remembered how much I liked it until like maybe the past like couple of years. And I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, I want to do that. Or like, that was always weird that we would just like call up, my parents would call up their friends and we would just like show up at their house and just be like, hey, we're here. You want to hang out?
Right.
It's just like, my dad was an extremely social person. I mean, as my mom too, so like most of our lives, there was always someone over that was hanging out, some friend of my parents, or we would go to some friend of theirs' house. But like, most of my life was always spent around like other families and other people, and we, not like we were some hippies and lived on a commune, but they just like.
No, I know what you mean. Just neighborly.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, yeah, the best summary is like they really loved being a part of a community.
I grew up outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, which is like the epitome of suburbia. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like
Super Bowl parties and like Christmas parties. Yeah, it was a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it was a good time. I think as I got older, weirdly, like you rebel against your parents, but kind of do the exact same stuff. Now I am not a pastor of a church at all,
right?
But
well, sort of. The podcast could be a church. It's the fashion church. I'm just kidding.
Man. But I got super into music, and that was actually what brought me out to New York. And so I moved out here in like 2004 or 5 to play music. And that was my whole like MO. As you can see, I sit before you a broken man.
Well, what kind of music were you playing? Like, what was? And you're a guitarist, right?
Yeah, I play guitar and piano.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm not good at any of that stuff, but I the one thing I like picked up from my dad was like his ear, and just kind of like learning how to, like I'm not like some music theory genius in which you put, papers in front of me and I sight read it and I just play you whatever. Those musicians exist and they're amazing, and I am in awe of them at all times. But yeah, no, I played piano and guitar and like mandolin and any other weird instrument that I thought would make me sound more fun or diverse. I have this accordion behind me that's like, 70 pounds and a huge mistake. But yeah, so I came out here to do that and just, figure out who I was as a young adolescent.
So what was the music you guys were playing, and like how big was it? Like a 3-piece band, a 5-piece band? Like what were you guys doing?
At the time it was just me and then a friend of mine moved up here that I was playing music with in St. Louis. And it was him and I in this little 8x7 bedroom. One thing that, it's the funny thing is like you come to New York and when I first came here, I'd never been here. So I moved to New York and had never actually been to the city before.
no
but I was like,
way.
I'm just going to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so stupid. But so I found a place on Craigslist, agreed to rent it sight unseen. I think there was a picture, and it was basically like, here is your room. And it was this like little 8 foot by 7 foot room with a window in it. There was like a mattress on the floor and 3 milk crates that you could use as, to store your stuff. Which was, to be honest, was fine. Like I didn't have that much and didn't really need that much. But the one reason why I'd chosen that apartment is on the listing, it was like the previous roommate had put this out on Craigslist, and he was like, hey, this is you get to live with the famous Bill Ware, the jazz vibraphone player. And I was like, who's this guy? And I looked him up, and like he played in like Steely Dan, and he toured with the Stones, and he I guess there's not a ton of vibraphone players out there, but
right.
Of the few, like that was
he's
his
the
spot.
guy of note.
Yeah, and he used it as his studio, the main apartment as his studio, and then there was a bedroom there, and that was like he just rented it out. And so it was me in there. A friend of mine move up. We're in this tiny room, and we're trying to play music, and it's just us two at the time. And then he has this. I don't know if it's New York or it's like the time of your life, but he was like, this sucks. Like, what am I doing? Like, he was like, we're 20 years old here. We're real adults. And he's like, I'm out of here. So he pieces out. But like any other place you move to, you make friends. And I had met actually, Brian Davis of, Wooden Sleepers, and my other friend Herm, and then another guy named Noah Stittleman. And we were all working at the Apple retail store. I'd worked at a bunch of odd jobs, right? When I came to New York, I worked at American Apparel for 3 months. I worked at Starbucks, where it's the only job I've ever quit. A homeless guy, and I say that because we knew that he was, he'd come in and like he would like take stuff out of the. Usually, okay, as a sidebar, if you work at Starbucks, at the end of the day, you have all this food and you give the food away.
Yeah.
And, he would come in and we were like, hey, we're going to go by Washington Square Park and we'll drop off the rest of the stuff. You're like, welcome to do it. But he would come in and he was like taking the money out of the tip jar. And I was like, hey, man, can you not do that? And I was like, hey, can you not do that? And I remember he, can I curse on your podcast?
Yeah, it's your time, dude.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, so he was like, I was like, please don't do that. And he looked at me like square in the eye and he goes, fuck you. And I was like, oh man, come on. I was like, please don't do that. And then he spit on me. And I was like, you know what? I was like, forget this. I was like, what am I doing? I'm in New York. I'm broke. I live in a tiny shithole apartment. I just got spit on by a dude and I'm making coffees for a bunch of ring dings. I was like, I can't handle this. And I just walked out. And I remember going back to my bedroom, to my apartment, and I walked everywhere because I was also scared to ride the subway at the time. And I was like, I went there and I was just like crying, and I was like, what am I doing? I was like, I'm such an idiot.
Oh, wow.
It's like I could be back at home and I have this like warm bed or whatever. And I remember I called my dad and I was like trying to pretend that like I had my shit together. And I was like, Dad, I was like, it's just like really hard. And my dad's like, how's the music going? Are you like gigging or anything? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. I think I'd been in New York for like half a year. And I was like, I think maybe I need to move home. And my dad was like, why don't you give it some more time? And it's funny because as a parent, you look back at that now, like if you know your kid's hurting, you kind of do want to protect him, right? And my dad was like, I think you're all right. And I was fine. But I met these other guys. So like that job sucks. I end up quitting. I work at the Apple store, meet these other dudes. We all kind of start playing music together. And a guy named Noah Stittleman and I were playing in a band, and that band turned into this like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's like 5 people in the band, and we were kind of this like, I don't know, I guess wannabe like Shins, Arcade Fire, Spoon, whatever was like kind of the cool music in 2004 or 5.
Totally.
And then we played a few shows, and I think we played Mercury Lounge a bunch, if you know like New York venues, and then we did North 6, which was like Music Hall Williamsburg at the time. Or it was before Music Hall Williamsburg. The place was called North 6. Glasslands. I mean, it's not like we were playing like Irving Plaza or anything, but then it was funny because while working at Apple, I had this new like role had popped up that was like the creatives, right? And they were test piloting this role, and I had a bit of a music background from my dad and like learning how to record, and so like I knew enough to be like not as big of an idiot, right? So like my knowledge was not totally there, but it's like I was competent. And all these like musicians and people would show up there. And like at the time there was really only one Apple store in New York. So you'd have like Soho.
Yeah, it was Soho, yeah. Cuz I think the Bravery, they would like record like there was like all these recordings that were out of that store.
The Bravery.
Yeah,
oh
dude,
man.
throwback.
Yeah. Dude, we played there. We played the Apple Store after I ended up leaving there. We were like, yeah, because they had these Live at Soho series.
Yeah.
So like my band did a Live at Soho, a bunch of, and
it's funny because the Bravery, that's the only set list I've ever heard out of that store, and I just know because the guy comes over the microphone on my recording, and he's like, hey guys, like you could tell he's a total retail guy and not like a venue guy. He's not like he's
Be
not
sure to check out .Mac.
Yeah, he's like, hey guys, welcome to Apple Store Soho, and today we've got the Bravery. And then I don't know, like I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, you know, slinging diesel
You're like,
jeans.
play an honest mistake.
Yeah,
Come on, let's
exactly.
do it. Yeah, I mean that was a fun time.
Yeah.
But I ended up befriending a few musicians, and you know, like because you'd have like John Mayer who would come in, David Bowie who would come in. Not that like I'm friends with those guys or even knew them. I would be very clear about that. But one guy came in, and I was helping him with some of the recording stuff, and he was in this band called Interpol, and I mean he still is. It's Paul Banks.
Oh,
and
sick.
We kind of like became buddies, and he ended up kind of starting to like politely or whatever you want to say, like kind of like mentor us music wise, and was helping us out. And you know, I think we played one night at, was it Fat Baby or something like that, and Paul came, and the music booker, it's weird, like just as a sidebar for a second, like you ever like remember stuff and then you remember all these other things with it because you like went and like your brain tried to like pull that memory out, and I'm like remembering the room and all these like weird dumb things that are irrelevant to the story but important in my
100%. It happens to me all the time.
It's strange, but like anyway,
usually when I'm listening to your podcast, that happens to me.
Jeez, I'm sorry.
I start thinking of like my old manager that I hated, or like, you know, like something like, you know, whatever.
Yeah, and so we played this show, and Paul showed up with his girlfriend, I think who was Helena Christensen at the time, and we like, it was like a packed show, and it was super awesome. And he was like, yeah, he's like, you know, you guys are really good, like maybe, you know, we'll bring you on tour. And you know, I think they were getting ready. I don't know if their album had just come out on Capitol or what, but they weren't on Matador at the time. And then I like went out with them a couple times, and he was like, as an aside, it's funny when you kind of like meet your heroes, because you always have this idea of like who they are in your brain, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah,
but sometimes they are. And Paul was that guy. He was like such a generous and encouraging dude. And I kept, you know, I would like write music, and I would send him demos, and he would give me input. And this is all on MySpace, I think, at the time. And you know, and then I you know, I would kind of like wait around. I remember getting in trouble at Apple because this guy who was in this band called Travis.
Oh yeah, I know Travis.
So okay, cool. He was at the Fran Healy was at the Apple Store, and I like gave him our demo like as an employee. And I remember my manager was like, "You do not do that." And I was like, he wanted it, and he found me on MySpace and was like, "Oh, these are interesting songs. You know, like you should keep going." And it's like, of course, you know, he was just trying to be a nice guy. But
that's hilarious.
Paul was like, "Hey, you should go work at Matador." He's like, they're looking for someone, and I know you're like not really feeling this. And like Apple was kind of weird, because then like all of us were starting to get more and more corporate jobs, and just like any other thing, like, you know, we're not really like retail employees anymore. Now we're like getting these other jobs, and you're going to Cupertino, and you're doing this, and which is cool, and you're getting money, but you're getting further and further away from like why you came to that city in the first place, right? Like,
sure.
If you want to be a rock star, you want to do that. It's like, okay, well now you're a guy who's like helping write like training syllabus. Like that's not a rock star. And so I was like, oh, this is my ticket out. Like, I'm gonna go work at a record label, and I'm gonna slip them my demo, and then you know, so like obviously everything is extremely, selfish and all about me. But
Well,
like,
career driven, man. That's what it's all about.
yeah, and I guess maybe it's okay to do that when you literally have no other responsibilities and you're in your early 20s, but I don't know. So I start working at Beggars, which was the greatest job I've ever had in my life, especially in hindsight, because it was like a company that was just the right size, if that makes sense. Where like there's a lot of people that work there, but there's not too many where you don't know everyone.
Right.
But there's also enough that you don't see everyone when you're at work. And it was a British company, and I got to go to London all the time. And I did slip a bunch of people my demo, and it didn't it didn't really pop. But I remember Chris Chen, who was the head of XL Recordings, who had signed Vampire Weekend at the time.
Nice.
We played a show at Cake Shop, and he had brought Ezra and the dudes to like watch us play, and like I don't know, but like I remember after the show, my friend Noah and he was like, "Yo, like Ezra and Rostam were here," and I think that first album had come out, and they were like going to tour with the Walkmen or something at the time. Like this is like the New York era I'm like dating here, and at one point and this is like I have to always admit this truth to myself. We had this opportunity to go on this bigger tour with this other band, and I looked to see how much money we were going to make and like if we were going to be able to do it. And when I realized that we were all more or less going to have to take out a loan to go on tour, and then do the entire tour and still not make enough to pay back the loan or even pay for the tour, I was like, oh. And I was at Beggars at the time, and I was doing like, well for a guy in his early 20s, and I was like, I think I'm just gonna keep working here. I was like, maybe in my mind, I was like justifying it as like, oh, it's because I want to be in the music business.
Right,
like,
right.
What are you talking about? No, it's because I wussed out. Like the truth is, I wussed out. I chose safety and security over going into like $10,000 of debt to drive around the city in a van.
I mean, I think that's fair. And I mean, maybe even in hindsight, the mature decision, even though you consider it wussing out, I don't know. But where did you go to college?
I did not go to college.
Oh, at all? Okay. So you like literally left St. Louis for New York to do the music thing.
I left St. Louis for London first, and the London bombings happen, and basically, I don't know, when you shave your head a lot and you wear Fred Perry and Levi's 501s and all that other stuff, I don't know if I got labeled as a skinhead or if I flubbed as being an 18-year-old kid going through immigration in Britain. Like, I'm dead serious. When I got to London, they were like, hey, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I'm moving here. And the guy was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I can stay here for 6 months, right? I was like, because I'm a U.S. citizen. And he's like, well, are you going to work? I was like, yeah, I'm going to play shows. And he's like, sit down. And I basically, my friend and I at the time, who I'd gone out there with, we both got detained and like sent home, and denied admission. And the funny thing is, years later, I get a job for a British company, and I go out and they open up my passport and there's this big X on it. Like, I'm not bullshitting you. There was this big X on my passport that said like I was denied admission. And they're like, wait, like you were denied admission once? And I was like, yeah, but that was like so long ago. That was this year. And they're like, sit down. And I remember my British boss like pulled me aside after he had to like make personal phone calls and like vouch for me that I was like not gonna, whatever, come in and ruin London. I was gonna go to school, but in full disclosure, like my family didn't really. All my other friends at the time, all their parents were like, just tell us where you want to go and we'll pay for it.
Oh,
or do this and we'll pay for it. And I remember I was like, hey, mom and dad, I was like, I think I want to go to this school. I want to do this. And my dad was like, we don't have that money. Like, you can start looking online and like see what sort of scholarships you can get or what sort of things. But like, we don't have that money for you. And I don't blame them, but it's just like, we didn't really have that. And I was so driven at the time. I was gigging a ton, playing music, skipping school. And when I was in high school to go play music around the city in New York, we were playing like the High Point and Creepy Crawl and all those other places. And that I was just like, you know what? I was like, I'm going to take some time off, whatever that means. And so I was like, I'm just going to skip school. I remember my mom was not that into it. My dad was like, all right, like, go for it if this is what you want to do. And to be honest, I just never got around to college at
Right.
all. And like, I was, I had this thing at WashU and I was going to go there and I was going to do this. And it just, everything all kind of fell through and like, I just backed out. And I'll be totally transparent because like, I talk to people about this on Blamo where people are like, yeah, you know what, my like on the job training was better than this.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Even, but the one thing that no one tells you is if you don't go to college and you don't have a high self-esteem and you wrestle with depression most of your life, you have a constant nagging in the back of your brain that whatever job you want to get, that whatever thing you want to do, you're always just not going to be totally good enough or qualified because you don't have a degree.
Right.
And of course, nowadays it's not as big of a deal, but it's still a thing. And I'll be 35 in a couple weeks, and that's like, not having that. I'm like, well, maybe do I do it? Do I not? And it's tough. But I'll be honest, I often really, really regret it.
Interesting.
But I don't know. I don't feel like I should have a bunch of regrets in my life, but I do.
Yeah, well, I mean, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So, like, what bands were you into, like, prior to meeting Paul, prior to New York? Like, what were your bands in high school?
Oh, bands in high school? It was all punk. It was, to be honest, it was Interpol. It was the Get Up Kids.
Oh, yeah.
It was Saves the Day. It was a lot of the like Vagrant Records stuff. I was into all the emos and like Dashboard Confessional.
Sure.
And then I had a friend like introduce me to Bad Brains and other like crazier punk. And I remember listening to it, and that was one of the earlier bands that I had heard and was like, oh, this is awesome. But in my mind, I knew I didn't really get it. Like I didn't have the true mental everything for me is like all music was all like highbrow, and I had to understand more. I had to empathize. I had to connect emotionally, and I was like, I can't connect with Bad Brains.
What made you leave the record industry?
Well, I mean, in the like as I was saying with high school, like I was really into clothes, and like that was always a thing. Whenever I got money, I would spend 100% of it on clothes, or even with music stuff, like it was more important to look good than to sound good. Don't know if that always equates, but in my mind, I was like, I had to look good.
Deion Sanders has this quote that I'll share with you. Do you remember the athlete Deion Sanders?
Oh yeah,
if
Cowboys.
If you look good, you play good. If you play good, they pay good.
Yeah. Well, that did not equate with me. Getting paid good for looking good did not, but Deion Sanders, I definitely. I was really into like just clothes as like kind of moonlighting stuff. And when I was at Beggars, blogs were all popping off, and I was like, oh, I could do this. And I had started a blog. I like digitally met Lawrence Schlossman and John Moy and like those dudes. This is 2008.
Yeah.
2009.
That's when I had mine.
Yeah, I mean it's like when everyone had theirs. Like a blog, like a fashion blog was basically like what photos were you going to put on your Instagram account now.
Yeah.
Like it's just it was just everyone had something. Cuz I had a live journal when I moved to New York to like let my parents know that I was going to be okay, but I never kept that up. And I remember getting a WordPress and all that stuff, but I I would write a bunch about clothes, and thanks to like Valet Mag, like Corey Ollendorf and Lawrence and a few other people, and Michael Williams at A Continuous Lane,
sure,
they would link me to some of their stuff. Because I'm not a good writer, but like I would just be able to find things or talk about things.
You had taste.
Yeah, maybe. But
you're being humble. Yes.
No, for myself, I knew what I liked.
Sure.
And so I got into that more and more. Next thing you know, and this is, as I started getting into watches too at that time, and there wasn't really any other like watch guys,
right?
At least that were writing. It was like Ben Clymer had had either just started Hodinkee or was about to start it. I think he had already started it, and I was writing about clothes and then writing about watches, and then I started writing for Esquire, like digital stuff, just for a bit, and I got more and more into it, and I was like, oh, like there's could be something here, and then I met, and I've told the story tons of times, but like I had met Lawrence and John, and we went to Capsule, and I was like, I was like, we should make clothes and sell clothes. Like we should do this, and then we can get clothes for free. Like again, like it always comes back to this sort of like selfish, like how can I? But yeah,
well,
so that
it's
was
smart
the plan,
because
was
if
to
that's
do
where
that.
all your money's going, you might as well find a way to get it for free or make a profit
Right?
while getting it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
See, I was the I was I was using my economic sense right there, right?
right.
But yeah, I mean that was kind of what got me into clothes for sure, was just that, and you also have like the validation of your peers. You have all these other people, and you're like, oh, you're into this, oh, I'm into this, you know.
Yeah.
It was fun.
It's funny. My laptop is sitting on a stack of books, and one of them's "Fuck Yeah, Menswear."
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, I got you. That's cool, man. Well, so then where'd you go next?
From there,
Well, you launched your own line, right?
yeah, I mean, if you could call it that, but yeah, we were doing that, and we actually did, in terms of sales, we did too well in the sense that all of our stuff was technically pre-sold, right? So we'd
Wow.
pay for the samples, we got the samples, and then we'd like blast as much as we could to tell everyone like, hey, this is cool, you should get this, it's cool, we're gonna take photos of ourselves in it. I mean, just like what every other influencer or whatever does, right?
Right.
And then we tried to sell it, and like Justin Doss was at GQ, and we're like, yo, Justin, we're like, we'll hook you up with a pair, can you list this and your best picks?
Yeah, a
and
little
stuff.
blurb or something.
Yeah, Sean Hotchkiss was doing the GQI, and we were just, we were like, yo, can you like show some love here?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we end up selling like, we're trying to sell like 12 shoes, and you end up selling like, 200 pairs of shoes, or you're trying to sell like 12 shirts, and you're selling like 400 shirts, and you're like moving numbers to where the people that like had allocated production time for you, they were like, this is not enough production time to make this, and we're making shoes for these people, or we're making shirts for these people, like, we're gonna have to delay it.
So what was your assortment consisted of then at that time?
So the first thing was Mark McNary took a chance on us and basically let us use his production. So they were Sanders shoes and that stuff, and then we started to make our own kind of private label, and so we were doing New England Shirt Company at the time. I don't know what they're called now, with like cutaway collar Oxfords and like the whole Anglo-Italian idea, and not Jake Grantham's brand, just like the mix of it, and then
Right.
double monk strap shoes. It was like shirts and shoes, and then I think we did some pants. We did like a coach's jacket. We did, just there was no correlation.
It was a hodgepodge of stuff.
Yeah, it was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah. I want this season, so let's make it.
Yeah, it's exactly. And it's funny because when you look back at this now, or whenever you talk to like real designers, like any real designer who solely designs for themselves is not that successful of a designer. And the ones that tell you that they're doing it, they really aren't, like, because they're like, you have to sell this to a lot of people, and it has to be really appealing. And if you're super cool, narrow mindset, and you just want to sell a red, camping 60/40 cloth that's like lined with Melton wool, like it's not that functional. It's you're not going to sell.
Nobody in San Diego's wearing that.
Exactly. But so yeah, we did that, and then I remember we went to PT Uomo in like January 2011 or 2012, and I met Mark Cho at the Armory, and Mark and I stayed in touch for a while, and then when they were going to do the Armory in New York, Mark reached out and was like, hey, like, would you be interested in like being a part of this? And I was, at Beggars it was cool, but like with any small company, you kind of hit a glass ceiling pretty quick, to where you're like, you can keep taking sort of incremental raises. And as much as I loved the music industry, I really loved the people there, and I kind of liked the music industry less and less. And by no fault of them, but it was just like the way that the industry was evolving and streaming, and as I was trying to play music myself and seeing, not that people were being mistreated, but you saw how little is really left for a musician. Like to make a living as a musician, there's just so much other stuff you have to do, and it was like kind of tough for me, and I was getting more and more into like clothes and thought I could do a business with it, and I guess this was 2013. I left, and a gentleman named Jeffrey Hilliard, who runs all the retail and marketing stuff for Hodinkee, and then another guy named Nick Ragasta, who now runs Stofa with Agyesh. We were like the original three dudes who were doing the Armory New York, which was fun. It was a ton of fun, and it was like this elevated retail experience. And I worked at Banana Republic when I was in high school for a little bit, and so I was like, yeah, it's just nicer clothes, and it was. I didn't exactly think that, but it was that whole mindset, because I had been doing a lot of e-commerce and a lot of digital and tech stuff for Beggars when I was there, and that was like kind of going to be my role, is to help roll out e-commerce and marketing for the Armory in New York.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so figuring out what all that stuff was, that was a great job. But
so what year did you leave the Armory?
I left the Armory in 2016.
Okay, so fairly recently, because you launched Blamo,
2016.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So then you did the ecom rollout, obviously, but like, so how did Blamo even come about then?
Blamo was just kind of like a hobby. It was just a way to hang out with my friends. In all honesty, because when Blamo first started, it was me and my friend Noah, who I used to be in a band with. And we were just kind of like talk, but like there was no theme, And I think like for me, like my mindset of anything is like, don't do something unless you're gonna do your absolute best trying to do it. And
right.
That's kind of a tacky, quote on the wall sort of mindset. But like, I really wanted to find a way to improve. I was like, how can I sonically make this good? How can I, how can I solicit feedback from my friends and people I know who are going to tell me, like, how can I improve talking to people? How can I improve listening? How can I improve, guest selection, make it appealing, make it diverse, make it something special? And the only thing that I had from all of the weird careers and weird friendships and relationships I had was just like I knew a lot of people. And so it was easy to get guests for a while, because I was like, oh, I know you, like Ben, like at Hodinkee, I was, like everyone in the first season were like text message, like, please come on my podcast.
Right.
They were like, fine. Like even like JJ Reddick, like, because I think he had a show at the time, or he had, I'm not sure, but like, they were just people that are like, all right, man, fine. I'll go do your nerdy show. But like, yeah, so everyone on the first season of Blamo was just that. And I got more and more into it. And I was like, okay, how can I improve? And I think at the time, there was like maybe 100 people listening to it. And then it jumped a little bit more and more. And I was like, oh, there could be something here. And my like contract or whatever ended with the Armory.
Are you a watch collector but having trouble finding something cool and unique? The last thing you really want is what everyone else has, right? Well, this is where my friend and former Standard Age podcast guest Tim Jackson comes in. He and his wife Jana own Passion Fine Jewelry in Solana Beach, California, where you'll find an incredible assortment of independent watches waiting for you in their shop and online. And if you're getting engaged, have an anniversary coming up, or simply have another reason to buy jewelry, they have you covered. Passion Fine Jewelry also employs a goldsmith on staff for any custom desires, so you're able to go that route if you so choose. Visit Passion Fine Jewelry when you find yourself in Southern California, but they're also open 24 hours a day at passionfinejewelry.com. And now back to my conversation with Jeremy.
I was like trying to do Blamo, and I was like, I'm going to try to do this on my own. And I tried it on my own, like to see if I could make a living off of it. And I think with ads and like the CPM and everything at the time, I think I was gonna gross like maybe $1,500 or something.
Wow.
And my wife at the time was like, "Yeah, you need a real job." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." And so I worked for a friend of mine's creative agency, which specializes in like working with not-for-profits and stuff.
Oh, cool.
With the mindset of like, I'm gonna keep trying to double down on Blamo and find a way to make it work. And I was there for about a year, and then all this, like the timing of this, was also like, I remember the day I was gonna accept the job from Five Stone, which was where I was working. My wife found out that we were expecting, and so I was like, man, thank God I accepted this job. And then the day she found out, she got laid off of her job of like 6 or 7 years at Etsy, because Etsy laid off at the time. They had laid off like 8% of their workforce.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was gonna ask, what was she doing there? What does your wife do?
She does like training and support. I don't know the right words. Learning and development.
Okay.
So she basically comes, so she kind of helps people scale their support, scale their company culture across as a company would grow, how to train, but she specializes in that stuff. And so now she works for a recovery startup that's like on like sobriety and wellness and stuff, but she works for them. But yeah, the day that I'd accepted that job at Five Stone, she had lost hers, because I was like freelancing a bit, and I was like, yeah, okay. I was like, I'm going to take this other job. It's going to be secure. Then I'm like, oh crap. And so did that. And then, to be honest, the show kept growing like an okay amount. And I was like, okay. I think she ends up getting a job at Samsung for a bit. And I mean, this is all like, the details don't really matter, but she got this other job. And so she was there, and like her job was really good. And she was like, hey, if you want, like, you can like focus more on your show.
Oh, sweet.
And then I'd gotten hired to do that like Mr. Porter miniseries.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, like, okay, I think there's enough here that I can keep trying to focus on this, and make and have enough that like it's not going to be the end of the world. And because the biggest thing is like, look, and this is the, like, I'm not getting political, but like this is the toughest part of any American that wants to be in a creative, I'm air quoting here, like field, is the sense that like you need health insurance. Like you know, especially as you're getting older, you got to find some way to like, how are you going to pay for health insurance? And most cases, your standard, whatever you're making as a creative, is not enough to pay for health insurance and to live. So it's like one or the other.
Right.
And so,
well, could you piggyback on your wife's policy then?
Well, so that was why.
Yeah,
so like
that
was like everything when I was able to focus more on Blamo was because my wife at the time had the health insurance.
I mean, that's me with like, Standard H, same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the line that runs through every single person who works in a creative field is your health insurance comes from somewhere else, because 9 times out of 10 you probably can't afford your own because you're a scrappy creative. And
what do you attribute that early growth to, when you said it kept growing a little bit more and such? Like, what was that? Was it
just Blamo?
Like word of mouth, or like because you probably weren't advertising, right?
No, I mean, honestly, it was timing. Like, at the time when I had started Blamo, there weren't that many other kind of like podcasts that was in the sort of men's fashion or lifestyle, or at least it maybe I'm wrong, but at least there weren't in that kind of like bubble or world that we're all in.
Right.
And and I had some like good press. I mean, there was at the time, it's funny because like Jacob Gallagher had written a thing in the Wall Street Journal about it, and he's an extremely professional person, and I remember being like, hey, you should write, and he was just like, I'm not going to just write about my buddies. Like, I can't do that.
Right.
And I think at the time something happened where there was a story that he was going to get an opportunity to write about podcasting, and he was like, hey man, like, I'm going to get to write about like men's fashion podcasting, and like, we can chat. And and I say that as like, I wasn't, he wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to hook up all my buds, but that helped me
relevant.
A bunch.
Yeah.
It was relevant, and that helped me about a lot, because I think the tough thing with podcasting, especially with the kind of like little micro world that we're in, is a lot of people and companies know about it, but they don't really know how it works.
Right.
And so a lot of people would make up shit. Like, I'm going to be totally honest with you. Like, I remember I had reached out to someone that was going to be on, and they were like, "Oh, what's your reach?" And I told them my reach, and they were like, "Oh, okay, so like you're pretty small." And I was like, "Well, it was like there's this," and they were, and it was fine, but they were like, "Oh, because we were just on Hypebeast podcast," and you can leave this on the record. Like Hypebeast told this person that they get 2 million downloads a day, and of their show, and I'm not kidding. And I was so mad, and I was like, "No, like they can't."
That might be their website.
Exactly. And I was like, I'm sure that this person doesn't understand. I was like, if you're getting like 2 million downloads of your podcast a day, like you are number one across the board. Like it is not, and look, it's fine. And I'm grateful more and more people are learning about podcasting and learning kind of how to judge and weigh other shows and impact and all that other, bogus stuff that everyone talks about. But I was like, dang it, like, these like brands and other companies were doing it, and I was trying to do it, and still like, but it was still, it's like, it was just me. I mean, maybe until a year ago, where there are other people working on the show. It was always just me. And while that's, with podcasting, or I don't know, maybe there are other creative fields that are similar like this, you grow and then you like kind of plateau, and then you grow and then you kind of plateau, and you just kind of, I was like, oh, is this it? Like, oh no, like I can't do this or this other, it was really, really hard. And to where you start to get why people do the other things, or like Patreons or things like that, because you're like, you start doing advertising and you start doing other partnerships, and when you're a little guy, you're not always going to get paid on time.
Yeah, no kidding. You become a bill collector. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the thing, is like, oh man, I would do an ad for someone or whatever we would do, and and you wait to get paid, and you're at like day 100 or something like that, and you still haven't gotten paid, and like, and it's not even that much, but like for me, this was everything. And so I was, it was tough. And it's funny too, because everything from the outside, people were like, "Oh man, you must be crushing it. I saw you just had this person on, you just had this," and you're like, "Dude, I have not been paid in months, and I'm trying so hard. And every day I look in the mirror and I'm like, what am I doing?" And that's, look, there's plenty of other crazier things going on in the world, but it was like kind of tough. But I would say, like, at least the early growth was just like a timing.
Right,
I mean,
right.
There's, as you're aware too, like there's just tons and tons of shows.
Yeah.
And I would say it's great now that more and more people that I talk to do have a bit more understanding about not only how important podcasting is and how impactful it is, especially in terms of storytelling, but how, like, what is success for a podcast? Like, how, and so you can't, I don't know if Hypebeast is still doing this, but like, you can't go and say, "Oh, I have 2 million people listen to me." Like, people can look some of this stuff up.
Yeah.
There's services where people can see your chart history, and people can see this, and you can get an idea of what this person's actual activity is versus what they're saying, and yeah. And so anyway.
How do you define your audience? I mean, obviously you're a menswear podcast, but like, how do you define it, or what's considered to be the demographic even?
Oh, well, the demographic, I mean, we're 92% men, which is something, this is a tough thing with podcasting, because podcasting is basically just very niche. Everything's niche. And
Right.
what makes a good podcast is to be niche, actually, right?
Yeah.
And so if you make a podcast that's about like men's fashion, you kind of are just going to be more male, which is fine. But it's also, as the show has grown, I've really tried to be more diverse, more appealing, more reflective of the industry as a whole. But what the listeners want is, dudes. Like, dudes, I'll have someone like some big whatever person that's bigger than men's fashion, but like that's in fashion. And if they're not doing men's fashion and it's just women's or something, listeners are just like, eh. And so like, I mean, at least the audience, I would say it's fortunately and unfortunately, it's an extremely like, either like a kind of up and coming dude getting into fashion or someone who's buying Patek Philippe's and Porsches, which is cool, but it's cool for advertisers, but I would say it's predominantly male, which is fine, I guess.
What is the age range?
Age range, millennials. You're like the kind of 25 to 34-ish.
Is that because of the platform, it being a podcast, you think?
I think, and it's funny because like with the Coffee with the Greats show, it is on like the network that we did, like that is not a predominantly millennial show in terms of audience. Now, I mean, look, the show is not even a month old, but like looking through the numbers and like our Chartable and everything else, like it's not. It's predominantly like dudes in their late 40s and stuff, which is, again, it's totally fine. But it's interesting to see. I mean, at least for podcasting, I think it's always better to just focus on like your content versus like, do you want to cater? Do you want to try to like build a full complete audience, or do you just want to do like what you're good at and what like stay narrow? It's just also why we're like, let's just make other shows instead of trying to make one show appeal for every single person in every single age range. Let's just keep making more shows, and because that's, it's obviously not as easy to do, but it does keep focus. The best advice I got from Blamo at the very beginning, and like, I mean, earlier we were chatting and you said that like you'll just message folks and stuff. I messaged Walt Mossberg of the Wall Street Journal, who was there at the time, and I was like, hey, like I'm doing this show because like Blamo was like fashion and culture and tech and all this like dumb stuff. It was basically all the things I liked, and I had a few episodes up and I sent it to him and he responded. And he was like, this is good. I like it. I like the artwork. I like this, He's like, my criticism and feedback is like, it doesn't appear focused. And like, that is the thing I try to take away no matter what, is like, okay, how do we keep this focused?
I sometimes wonder that about my show, to be blunt, just because it's not industry specific. It's like personality specific, in air quotes, obviously, with like the entrepreneurial spirit, which
sure.
I mean, that's like long in the tooth as well, obviously, but
it's tough. It's a challenge. And it's things like, there'll be people who will reach out who I want to have on, or they want to be on, and we're like, this isn't a good fit. And it doesn't mean that they're bad or we're bad or whatever. It's like, it's not a good fit.
Right.
And as like the show grew a bit, I was like, okay, like I should have done this ages ago, but like, what are we and what are we not? And if you kind of put that on paper, you let the paper be the bad guy versus everything else, and it's tough because we'll have actors and athletes and people who are in that. And I'm like, okay, well, we need to keep the conversation more about this because this is the show and this is why people are here. And, some of these people, I'm like, look, with all due respect, like you've done like 5,000 other interviews and you've talked about all these other things. So like, there's no point in you like telling me your story, like you're an actor and you've been on Mark Maron, like this is not, and he did it way better. Right. So we don't need to go there, but we can talk about this. And it's also what the audience wants. And so it's tough to find that balance because, you want to be a big show. You want to have a lot of people doing it, but I've never had just like overnight growth. It's always just been like, okay, we're up a little bit this year. We're up a little bit this, and especially being a show that's interview based, a lot of like bigger and bigger folks will be like, okay, let's give this guy some time. They're like, let's see, are you still going to be around in a year? Are you still going to be around in this? Oh, you're like independent and okay. All right, let's circle back next year, or let's circle. And you're like, that's a bummer and a bitch to read of an email. But I'm just like, all right, I put it in my calendar. I'm going to reach out to you in a year. Like, and I'm going to tell you that hopefully we're bigger, we're better, or whatever. And like, let's do this.
Yeah.
It's
and I mean,
hard,
that's
though.
kind of, and that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, like to your point of like people going on Mark Maron or whatnot. Like, I wanted to talk to you because there's very few opportunities, well, that I've been exposed to anyway, that explores you, Jeremy, as a person, and also the nuts and bolts behind Blamo, for example, because
Right.
you're not going on Blamo talking about like your demographics and like, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say you probably don't put my demographics and stuff on there just because I don't want people to think I'm like I think that they're not good enough by being whatever they are.
Oh, no, I don't think people would think that. I think it's just matter of fact. Like, you're a menswear
Yeah.
podcast.
No,
and
it's fine,
so
yeah.
it's mostly men, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
if women hear that and say, well, I'm going to change this, you know, then so be it. You
Yeah,
know?
that's true.
I
Yeah.
mean, to be fair, most of my audience is men as well. Why that is, not sure. Maybe because there's a lot of cars and watches and the occasional fashion talk, you know, that's focused on menswear, frankly.
Yeah.
But I do want to kind of get in sort of to the nuts and bolts of Blamo, for example.
Sure.
Like, what does your preparation involve?
It depends on the person, you know, because I think a best conversation, at least in a podcast, right? It's going to be candid, and it needs to be candid, and that's what's going to be the most fun for the person. It's going to be what's the most fun for the audience. So if, you know, a lot of times, like, I'll have like, hey, these are my points of where I want to take us in this conversation. But if we start talking and they're really interested in like something that is totally unrelated, or they say something that you're like, that is super bizarre, but I want to explore that more. Your initial feeling is what the audience is too. So like, go there and scrap your bullet point, because it doesn't really matter, because wherever you're going to go is far more interesting because of the actual conversation that's happening.
Yeah, it's natural.
You know? Yeah, it's natural. And, you know, that the good thing is at least like for me and like doing enough, you're like, wait, you did that? Okay, hold on. And it's like, well, damn it, I'm just going to scratch everything else. And then we're just going to go and see what happens. And I think in a weird way, the best and most personal shows for me of Blamo have been when I didn't focus on like my talking points or where I wanted to go. It was like, I just want to listen to this person, you know, because I'll record with someone for, you know, always a minimum of like 90 minutes ish, but sometimes we'll go like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, totally.
But the thing is, you also want to edit. And, you know, like Brendan, who does editing, and Heather, who does editing, they're good because they're separated enough from me that they're like, wow, this must have been a great conversation for Jeremy, but the audience does not give a shit about it. And they're like lopped off. And
wow,
they're right. They're always right. They are always right. Because when you listen to it and you hear the flow, you're like, this is so long. It took us this long to get to here. And while, you know, people's time, like 1 hour is really the sweet spot. You know, if you are Joe Rogan, that's cool, but Joe Rogan can be Joe Rogan because he is Joe Rogan, right? But when it's someone that they don't know, at least like the audience trusts me enough or trusts us enough. They're like, okay, well, I'll give you an hour, you know, which is a lot. But so that's like all you can get. So if people aren't hooked early, or the conversation isn't engaging enough early, even if that took an hour and a half to get there on a recording, it needs to happen way earlier.
Right.
And that's the tough part when you want to have an empathetic connection with a person, but you also want to produce an entertaining connection with the audience.
Yeah.
That is I think that is the biggest challenge, because you should never, that's not a fair thing to say. It's not good to discredit someone's story, and not that that's happening, but if it's not as relevant to the larger point of the overall conversation, it can't be there.
And that's kind of where I start to feel not insecure, but start to worry, because I'm like, well, for one, it's like, are you going to remember what we talked about and be like, dude, that asshole cut that out, you know? Or like, that was a really strong point I made. And like, I start thinking like, I don't know if it's the empathy in me thinking like what they're saying is important. And I don't know, maybe even if I don't find the importance in that, maybe the listener will, or because they said it for a reason. You know what I mean? But
sure.
and maybe that's to your point earlier of it's just not a good fit, not as a guest, but just as a comment.
And exactly. And I think for you, it doesn't, with all due respect, like, actually, I don't even know why I would have said that. Like, it doesn't matter what I think. This is your show.
That's true.
This is how
100%.
This is how you want to put it. So if you were like, hey, you talked about how, how much you had this weird thing about your dad, but it didn't fit because we talked more about the business of podcasting, take it off.
Right.
That's the tough thing with that stuff, because sometimes you're like, oh, I want to do this person justice, but you're just like, no, like this is my show, and the message that I want to send is this.
Mm-hmm.
And people get it. I think more and more people, especially like people that you don't know as much, they get it. You just like, because there's also no, oh man, like you took that out. Like how would I say that? I don't know this person, or like, I mean, I'm like, I don't know everything about. I don't know your middle name. Like like, so I'm not gonna like pull this and be like, why did he take that out?
So you mentioned 2 names. What is the structure of your team currently?
So there's John and Will. So Will does production and like production planning, and then he also does like overall like senior like production and all that stuff for like Blamo and Blamo Media. And then John he heads up all of our partnerships, kind of like our like basically he's the guy who will be like, hey Jeremy, like that was good, but is there a way for us to actually like pay people? And it's like, oh no, okay, then we're not doing it. And it's like, you need people like that. Like they are like smart. They're way smarter than I'll ever be. And they're also, they know me, but they're detached enough that they can make sound business decisions and also be like, hey, you know what? You never really thought about this. Like, here's a show we could do, or here's a person you should talk to. You should give this a second look. You should do it.
Yeah. How did you find them?
They just kind of like found me, and I just kind of begged them to help me.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird, but I mean, I would, and then working like day to day on the show, Brendan does editing, Heather does editing, Maddie does like social media and all that other stuff. And like she also does a lot of like, she has good insight for like marketing and things like that. And then I have someone who helps with scheduling now. And it's only because I'm running my show, but I'm also making another show for myself, actually, weirdly, about my dad and his life.
Oh, no way.
And Parkinson's disease. Yeah, it's like it's a narrative show, but it's way more work.
Wow.
But it is, it's more going to be like a narrative exploration of like people and adults that try to understand grief and terminal illnesses and parenting, and it's not a a novel concept. It's not a new idea, but it's just something that's like, okay, I think this could be this. I like this could be fun to do and worth doing, and then so I have a person who helps out with scheduling for all that.
Is most of the growth, be it personnel wise or just even yourself and not needing, to work a full-time job, is it all ad-based revenue that's supporting the podcast, or have you done any? Well, and then obviously I wanted to talk about the Patreon as well, because you launched that within the last year, I know, but I want to say 6-8 months ago.
It was February, yeah. So I think we announced it in February, and it went live in like March for when the 7th season went.
Now, why did you decide to do it?
Well, initially it was like, okay, like there were a lot of people that wanted more, but there wasn't a ton of people that wanted more, right? Like, it's like, okay, well, and then I had a lot of like, and I say a lot because like people would email and be like, hey, like, do you do donations or do you do this? And that feels good when you're like, yeah, sure, I could use that. Or, and I had casually joked, but it was true that I was selling a lot of stuff to like fund the show. Like, I mean, I don't own a Rolex Batman anymore. I don't own a Patek Philippe 96. I don't own any of these watches that I thought were going to be the only watch I would ever have. because when you need cash to like fund your dream, you find ways to get it. And it's just like, okay, I'm just going to sell this. I'll sell this. I'll sell this. I'm grateful that I was able to have it to sell, but I was like, I can't keep doing this.
Right.
The show wasn't really making anything, and it was going further and further into debt, like, because I would keep investing more. And when you make more, you're like, okay, well, let's invest a lot more. Let's do this.
Right.
And because the ads help, but it's like, in a weird way, the ads like aren't consistent in terms of like being able to pay someone when they give you an invoice. Like, because we had people who initiated very, very early who were like, hey, I'll work, and they'll just kind of like work for free. And I was like, this doesn't feel good.
Right.
Because like, I can't hold this person to a standard, because in most cases the unwritten rule or agreement, or in other cases written, is payment for the work. And so it's like someone would do something like, dude, that was messed that up. Or now I would go and I need to redo it. Or this person, was emailing a brand and asking for free stuff with like a Blamo email address. And then that PR person's being like, why do you want this free thing? And I'm like, well, who's that? And I have to go and be like, why are you asking for free shit? And then they're like, well, you should have, it's just all whatever. And so you're just like, let's just pay people. We'll be honest about what we can afford to pay, but let's just pay people.
Yeah.
And so again, you're investing more and more. And so you just like can't really count on advertising to pay you on time. At least because like we're not big. Like we're, at least with the people we're trying to get advertising with, they're just like, who are you? Oh, okay. Like, what are you? Oh, all right. And that's fine. You get used to it.
You've discussed ego with Paul Feig and Oliver Spencer. Great episodes, obviously.
Oh, thanks.
How has the podcast success affected your confidence?
Great question. Unfortunately, it hasn't that much, because it depends on what you define as success.
I think that's great, man.
Well,
that's the result. I think that's great, because I think with a lot of people, their heads are can't fit through the doorway.
Yes, I mean, for me, and this is the luxury I have of making Blamo, is everyone that comes on is someone I just like, I love, and I want to learn from, and I want to celebrate, like, and I want to But I want to have a conversation with. So it's never going to be PRE or fake or anything, and because of that, it's not like, oh, if you do something you love, you never work. No, you're working your ass off because you love it. That's such a bullshit thing.
Yeah.
I hate that. But I also, and it's funny because I'll go on people's podcasts and people are like, man, Kirkland, I know you could talk so much. But it's like, when you have someone on yours, like, I always try to tell myself, just listen to them and ask them and make them feel comfortable enough that you can keep listening. And so with that, there in a lot of ways is like almost not enough. I don't ever want there to be enough space that my ego should grow. It should always be theirs. And I think, while I am really grateful that the show has had some form of like moderate success and people like it and stuff, it's my idea and understanding of what success has rapidly evolved over the years, into where now I'm like, I was successful before I did Blamo because, I had, and this is tacky, but like I had friends and I loved them and they were important in my life. And like, when you dumb it all down, like you want someone's arms around you when the world's ending, right? And it's not like it is right now. I mean, I'm very optimistic, but it's just like you just want someone there, whether it's a friend or family member or significant other. And I was like, oh, I have this. And in a weird way, it took me trying to funnel everything into a career in music or a career in fashion or podcasting, whatever that is, to realize that like, oh, this isn't fulfilling. I love it. I enjoy it. But at the end of the day, if I'm like trying to measure the weight of my life, it's, it's like my daughter, it's like, that's so tacky, but it really is.
It's
and it's a weird feeling,
man. Not at all.
it's just a feeling that I didn't realize that was what I cared about. It's my wife and I were talking the other night, and she was like, are we good parents? Because I think like our daughter was being like a total jerk, and she's 2, so she's like, she doesn't know. And we were all annoyed with her, and we were.
They should just like rename that age jerk. Not just
Yeah,
don't even call it 2. Just
yeah. I mean, it's funny, like Adam Powey and a bunch of other people talk about like, yeah, if you don't like strongly dislike your kids at that age, then like maybe you're not actually parenting them.
Right.
Because it's like you're like, well, you have this personality and you're being mean. Like what's wrong with you? And my wife was like, are we doing the right thing? Are we being good parents? And I was like, yeah, because when you summarize like all that she actually needs, she's got food, water, shelter, and we'll look at her and we'll hang out with her and we'll try to give her our physical time and attention. And that's really all she needs. She doesn't need another toy. She doesn't need another puzzle. Like, she doesn't really care.
Right.
Like, she needs that. And I'm like, oh, I have that. Okay. Yes, I am, air quote, rich and successful, even though in my mind, I think that I'm not because I don't have a Daytona anymore, or I don't have, it's just like that. And it's tough because it also is like I picked a hell of a hobby or
I was going to say the topic
that's all about
yeah,
that's all about this when like you're like, no man, I don't need it. And it's not like, oh, I read some book and I'm elevated. It's just I try to keep that humble mindset as much as possible. But I will be honest, I am a more fun, engaging, cooler personality to be on a podcast. If I was like, fuck family, it's all about getting all the dope shit and like, let's do this. It's just not me.
Well, it's funny you mentioned your daughter because I was going to ask you, like, since you launched the pod, obviously you became a father. So like,
Yeah.
how has fatherhood changed you?
I am more emo than I ever realized. I cry daily. I won't lie. I cried earlier. I nearly cried on this podcast just talking about her. I think I also am trying to be more empathetic towards my own parents and my own childhood and the things that happen, because you realize that like, oh crap,
that's why
adults don't really know what they're doing either. Like none of us really have an entire idea and understanding of how to raise people or how to like, earn a living or do all these. I mean, you're just every day, everyone's just like, oh, all right, let's hope this works. And so with that, I think I've tried to be more patient and forgiving.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I think like some of the qualities I admire most about you are like your self-awareness and, dare I say, your self-deprecation, especially when it comes to like previous fashion decisions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good old-fashioned Lexapro pill right there.
Yeah. Well, what do you think's made you such a fashion chameleon?
Searching for an identity like everyone else. I'm just more vocal about it. People wear clothes because they want to find a way to define themselves. Anyone who, I remember I did this like, what was it? They're called, Fuddruckers. I can't remember the name. Symposium. It was one of Simon Crompton's symposium in Florence at PT Uomo.
Okay.
And it was about like streetwear, and everyone kept trying to boil down like the essence of streetwear. And you had Waco who was on there, and it was like, I remember I'd met him the first time that night, and I was like, man, this guy's a genius. Like, he's so gifted. He's such an intelligent person. And you had like someone like David Coggins, who's also extremely intelligent. There are a lot of great fine people up there, and everyone was trying to dissect this stuff. And I just verbally vomited because like Simon was like, well, Jeremy, like, what do you think? And I was just like, this is about an identity. And I was like, every single person in this room chose what they want to, like, chose what they're wearing because they want to tell someone else who they are.
Like, that's who they are. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you want to, like, it's why like people flex on clothes. It's why, because at the end of the day, all of these things are just like trying to find ways to define them. And for me, that was clothes too. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get really into Carol Christian Poole because none of my other friends at the time know it. And I'm trying to choose the road less traveled. And I'm going to go way in. And you can't understand an artist unless you fully embrace their mindset. And it's like, that's bullshit, but that was what I believed. And so that's what I did. and I am grateful to look back at it and laugh at it because it's like, oh, okay. In a weird way, I'm still like that. Like I got a bicycle and I'm like, I got to get all bike gear, man. I'm going to wear a little tiny brim hat. And I'm going to look like a little bicycle dude. Yeah. I was like, okay, I can't do this. Come on. Like let's center, let's come back to earth. Let's recenter here. And it's just, and at the end of the day, all these things it's a little bit more fun to laugh at than to take it serious. I think if anyone who is really trying to draw a correlation or like line in their fashion history, or lack of a better term, it's completely made up in hindsight bias.
Right. So what are you rocking most these days? You have a Hawaiian shirt on, basically.
I do. This is an 18 East shirt from Antonio Ciongoli, who's just crushing it right now. A lot of the stuff I've been wearing at home is all like, I don't know, like Patagonia baggies, like comfy home stuff.
Yeah.
I have been continuing to order or like prepare for what my wardrobe will be after COVID. But in all honesty, what I end up wearing every day is different than what I'm like looking at. And I think it also has to do with the fact that like I'm sweating profusely and I'm not showering every day. I'll just be honest, you're just like, well, let's forget about that this day, or you were with your kids 16 hours straight. So yeah, but what I am continuing to look for is like casual tailoring, and like as casual tailoring as it can be, to where, like let's take all the canvas out of all my sport coats, which you can't do and you shouldn't, but like that's like the stuff I want to order. So it's like Patrick Johnson, it's Jake Muser, it's, but now, and I think it's funny, a lot of people are trying to do this. I looked at my closet and I was like, more than half of this is like great memories, but they're not great clothes.
Right.
And I was like, I need to thin the herd.
I think that's an age thing too, though, like when you get to the point where you're looking in your closet and you want quality over quantity, I think, at the end of the day, or at least I do.
Yes, you do. And it's tough because there's, and I'm not getting political, but like we're in this like very consumerist, capitalistic, culture and mindset where it's like, yeah, but you know what? I just grabbed my phone to read an email and I somehow like got sucked into Instagram, and now I'm seeing all these ads for this and this, and now I feel that like, is my water bottle good enough? You're like, are my socks okay? Is my HDMI cable certified to make a strong connection? It's just like dumb shit that you really don't need.
Right.
You just want.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite designer?
For different points in my life, yeah. I mean, I love like Eddie Slimane is what got me into Dior, and it's what got me into clothes, because like that was this look. It also had to do with like the Libertines. And by the way, I've never done cocaine or anything, but I was like really into like that look.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like almost like heroin chic.
Yeah, and maybe it's because I was a super fat kid and everyone was skinny, and I was like, yeah, maybe I can do that. But like, I think, in all honesty, like Antonio Ciongoli is probably the best like designer right now, because he's so laser focused that and like all the stuff that he's doing, like no matter what anyone else is making or anything, he's like, no, this is it. What I'm doing is the right thing, and right now it's really, really working. And
yeah,
I'm proud of him for it.
I feel like Japanese brands are really good at that.
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, when you think of like the terms of any company, brand, item, product, show, whatever, it's like focus is key, because it keeps things predictable and in a good way, where like I know what I'm going to get if I buy Patagonia.
Right.
Because Patagonia is never going to make a sport coat, but they are going to make these shorts, and they're going to make them every year, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. But like, it's tough because liking, like Italian menswear, whatever, there's no real design to it. It's just fit and aesthetic. And so like I love Simon Amel, the Swedish guys, Patrick Johnson, what Jake Muser's doing, and all those guys, and a lot of, and I mean this as a compliment. They all overlap in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Of like soft tailoring.
Yeah.
Sportswear. Like, I mean, the other person who I think is probably one of just the best designers, you have like Michael Hill of Drake's, who's just a fantastic curator, because I think, there's far more to it than just like, oh, I have my own vision. Like, he can look at, oh, you know what, this guy's wearing this. This guy's wearing this. Okay, we're going to blend some of this together and also find a way to sell this.
Right.
And then Michael Bastian, in all honesty, I know he's kind of gone dark a bit, but when I look at, like the JFK Jr. collection he did.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's so good. And it's like, oh man, like that, especially now when you think about like clothes that you want that's kind of narrow and focused and consistent, but still communicate something about yourself and what you like. Michael Bastian. And, I mean, and the Speedos aside, I mean, I'll be honest, he'll say it too, but yeah, I mean, it is great. Ralph Lauren's good, but this is not a discredit to Ralph Lauren. Everyone says Ralph. It's just like a given. Well, you kind of have to, because you're an American and you like American
It's
clothes.
a mainstay.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, you like Ralph Lauren. So, anyway.
Well, I mean, obviously you and I both worked retail. How do you go about helping guys find their own style when they're just entering the picture?
Great question. Be okay to make mistakes and figure out what you like. I think, now I tell people to make mood boards, because in a lot of ways to say like, oh, just buy a bunch of stuff, like that's kind of not really ethically good. If you have the cash, great, help the economy. But if you don't, you're kind of just buying more shit. Mood boards are helpful. There's like Jeff Hilliard. He always hates, because I've said this about him. Like, he keeps a little like mood board on his phone of not only the inventory of like the clothes that he has, but also like the looks that he likes. And so when he does buy clothes, it's very focused, and everything he gets is building into a larger wardrobe.
I do the same thing on my phone.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I have like an outfits, like I don't call it fits. I actually say outfits, but it's like the folder in my Photos app or whatever. It's called outfits.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's key. And I mean, and I feel bad when you were talking about designers. Daiki Suzuki of Engineer Garments, like that should have been number one. But yeah, I mean, those like being able to kind of have, because if you're like me, you see something else and you get excited, and then you're jumping to here and you're jumping to here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I came in here to get a Navy suit, and I walked out with this. And you're like, what?
But that's also the same mindset that leads you to question your HDMI cable.
Yes, exactly. Because I'm like, what the fuck? I don't, I need focus. So, yeah, like that's genius to do something like that. And I always tell people, I'm like, yo, like go get a Pinterest, get whatever, or go find and use your little bookmark tool on Instagram and ask people, like, that's great. Go for it.
Yeah, totally. Can we talk about the art of buying books and shelving them for a while?
Ooh, sure.
Because I am in that camp with you and Will Welsh.
Yeah. That is a very, I have to stop with that.
I mean, I have a problem. My laptop's sitting on a stack of books I have not read.
It's worse too, because then I forgot that I bought a bunch of Kindle books too. And I was like, oh, I have all these books. And then I'm like, oh, wait. Yeah, I have all these other Kindle books. I'm every night during quarantine, I would say 90% of every night, I'll read for 20, 30 minutes. But the problem is all the books that I'm reading are like Chernow and just like stupid long, or like, hey, I'll go ahead and read, The Last Lion and all the Churchill bios and all this stuff. And I'm like, that is like 5 years of reading in a series. Like, what am I doing thinking I can stack that and like a bunch of Chernow books and thinking, oh, I'll read them during quarantine.
It's like heady stuff before trying to go to sleep.
Yeah, that's true. It's very stupid. But I keep buying them.
Yeah.
I did get a bunch of books. because someone was like, oh, like you should be supporting like local bookstores and stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, for sure. Because I have no problem admitting my idiocy. I was just buying everything on Amazon because it was convenient. When we lived in Fort Greene, there was Greenlight, which we would go to and buy. But here there's nothing. But there's I forget the name of the site, but there's a site where you can basically e-commerce buy your books, but it'll connect you to a local bookstore.
Oh,
and so
cool.
you can get it from there. In most cases, at least for the books that I was looking at, the Amazon discount was not, it's the delta isn't that big. It's like I can swallow like an extra $3 or $4 to help like a independent small business than Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah. Well, we kind of touched on watches. What was your first watch?
First watch, was my grandpa's Casio digital watch. I actually have it. I have the model. I lost it. But that was my first watch. And then I remember getting like the first watch that I bought, like my own sort of hard-earned money. I had an Air King, excuse me. This was at the time you could get an Air King for less than $1,000, which was a lot of money for me, but it was still like, I bought it all for the wrong reasons, just like with a lot of clothes, in the sense that like, oh, this is going to make up for the fact that like I didn't, go to college or finish college. This will make me equal in the room. Is that like I have a Rolex. Like, look, I'm successful,
Right.
which is like kind of sad, but at the same time, it was like, oh, this was my, like, I survived New York. Like I'm still here after 4 or 5 years, whatever it was at the time. And so I'd gotten that, and that it got way worse because then at the time Ben and I were pretty close, and we were like, he'd be like, oh, you should check out this watch, and you should check out this watch, and I started buying watches, not like with tons of money or anything, but he's like, oh, you should look at this company, you should look at this, and this was before everyone was trolling every single site, but like he found some great stuff on Etsy.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, early on. And I think he's probably already told this story, but he had bought just a killer, I don't remember what watch. It was like a Brigade Isle Patek or something, but he had bought it from someone on Etsy, and they sent it to him in a padded envelope, and the watch was inside of a like a prescription pill box.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, it was great. It was perfect. It was fine, but like it was just like you could find stuff super cheap. You still can.
Yeah.
But I think like still like the definition of super cheap, like maybe you can find like, a bunch of guys all of a sudden are trying to buy all the Wes Anderson amphibias, the Vostok amphibias, that you can get for like $400 or $500.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a great watch.
Well, what do you look for in a watch? Like when you're looking for a watch, like, are you aesthetically driven? Like, there's so many different camps, right? Like, you're either a dial guy or a case guy, or are you a tool watch guy, or are you a dress watch guy? Like, the straps, bracelets. I mean, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes because, I do want to wrap this up soon, but like.
No, yeah. I mean, for me, the watches that I was really into and still are into are just like something that didn't scream luxury. It's funny because I started with the Rolex, right? But like,
right,
but still had a bit of history in it.
Yeah.
So like that was why I kind of fell into Seiko's quick, because it's like, oh, you can get these cool watches, and it appeals to every mindset of your ever changing idea and personality. So it's like, okay, cool. Like the Pogue was really cool because it, yes, a lot of people say the El Primero was the first automatic chronograph, but like the 6139 or whatever it was, I should have known. But the Pogue was like, that was also like one of the first automatic chronographs. And then, the history of that watch, and the case of that was kind of funky. And you could also wear it, and, I mean, it's not a $10,000, $15,000 watch. And so it's easier to get, it's easier to understand. It's easier to acquire, it's easier to understand, and it's still like kind of unique.
Yeah.
And that ticked every single box. And so no matter what, if I was like, oh, I'm going to be really into the movements now,
Yeah.
I could still do that with old Seikos.
Well, who are the original Seiko boys?
Me. And I made it. I made it as a joke. Actually, it was me, and I was trying to get John Caramonica, the New York Times pop culture critic.
Okay.
Like I was like, we like occasionally will like DM over just like dumb things, or I'll like tell him about Hootie and the Blowfish stuff or whatever. And he
that was my first concert.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, that was pretty anticlimactic, man. You started with the best. It's just like can't get better than Darius Rucker. So,
Dude, yeah.
By the way, their new album is kind of trash though. So sorry about that.
I didn't even realize there was a new album. So.
Go check it out and just let your heart break into a million pieces.
And and text you, you're right.
It's just like I just want to hear Hannah Jane. But I was like, my wife will actually like make fun of me whenever I get into something, and she'll be like, "Oh, he's a this boy." Like I was shaving my head, and she's like, "Oh, he's a bald boy. He's a this boy. He's a this boy." I realized that also some of that connotation is affiliate with like other forms of culture that I'm not associated with.
Right.
So I didn't realize that. But so my wife was just like, "Oh, there's this," and I had a Seiko, and she's like, "Oh, look, he's a Seiko boy," and I was like, "Oh, that's funny." And then I just kept like putting it out there, and then I was trying to get like John Caramonica to get a Pogue because he was like, I think I want to get a good watch. He's like, but I don't want to get like an expensive watch. I don't want to get a watch that says more about what I want to tell someone when I come in the room, which like is very true when you get into watches. Like people are like, yo, I'm wearing this UG tri-compact. So this now I really know my shit, and it's just like, okay.
I know you're in New York City. Are you a car guy at all?
No.
Not at all.
I'm not anti. I'm just
right. You ride the train.
Yeah, weirdly though, my first car is like a ton of people's like love affair cars. I had a 1986 Volvo 240DL station wagon, which was my dad's friend's car that they had given to me because I was teaching his son guitar lessons. And like he worked in the Air Force or whatever, and they bought it in like Saudi Arabia, and so like they had it brought over when they'd come over, and there was like a carpet across the dash to keep the dash from cracking in the heat and stuff. But I had that car for ages, and that was a car that died on me on the highway, like died.
Oh,
but
wow.
It had 300 some odd thousand miles on it. I mean,
oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I meant to ask you this earlier, frankly. How do you define success?
The ability to keep doing it.
That's cool. I've never heard somebody say that before. I think that's great.
Yeah. I mean, because in most cases, right? Like, I think for me, success was like this many listeners or this guest or this sort of thing.
Yeah,
and it's
quantified.
Like, but that's going to evolve, but like, and also like you may never get that. So does that mean you're never successful? And if so, that's like a pretty sad way to live.
Right. Sure. Due to COVID, what's something that you now appreciate that you never did before or ever even thought about?
Oh, great question. This sounds dumb, but I would say like solitude. In a weird way, I'm sure a lot of people are getting an obscene amount of it. I mean, I'm very appreciative of family and friends and like just FaceTiming buddies through the night and making jokes about like cheesy movies.
Yeah.
But also with so much stuff happening at all times, like I don't think I've had much of my own personal time to like truly reflect on it. And so I've been like just going for walks, so lame, but like just going for walks like on the waterfront and just thinking and like not having my phone, not listening to music, not like looking for a distraction, and just being like, okay, what can I just like sit and think about during this? And I don't mean meditating, and I'm not belittling it, but it's just like
it could be. I mean, there are different versions of meditation, so I mean, maybe that's just your version. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not TM, but it's kind of my thing, and I think that has been like, oh, this was very undervalued. I mean, I'm out there with a mask, but you're still just like, this is nice to just sit here.
I know a lot of creatives who do that. They go on walks, like uninterrupted walks, and it could be 15 minutes and it could be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you do that. That's really cool, though. I like that.
Yeah, and also writing things down.
Yes. Well, if I don't write things down, nothing gets done.
I really, I have like 15 field notes that I kept buying to be like, this time I'm going to fill it. And now I'm like, okay, like, I mean, like, seriously, like, I'm going to fill, I'm like, I have this thing right here. I'm like, I'm going to fill this. And I've been doing that. And just like, it's funny though, because I'll look back at it and I'll read. I'm like, why did I write down like 2 cats? Like, what is that?
Right.
I don't know if it's coherent, but I'm writing things down.
What's something many people would be surprised to learn about you?
Oh, geez. These are great questions.
Well, thanks.
I would say, at least from like what you were talking about, is a lot of people think like, oh, like maybe I have it together, and I completely do not.
Oh.
Not that I'm like a ball of nerves and anxiety, but like
Right.
yeah.
No, I hear you. I think there's a lot of us in that same boat as well.
Yeah.
Instagram just shows the highlights. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, for sure.
Last question, and you can name 3 or you can name 1. I don't care. But who are your top 3 style icons and why?
Style icons. Okay. My grandpa. Tacky
Sick.
answer, but true. Like he would wear the same thing a lot, but he also like we were chatting earlier, like his mindset on everything was like, it wasn't about like luxury. It was about like comfort for him. So like a lot of his sweaters were acrylic because he thought that was more comfortable,
Right.
His pants were polyester because again, like this is a guy who like made, finally started to like make it for himself in like the 60s and 70s. So like that was what you got. You got, those sort of like produced fabrics.
Yeah.
But he looked together. He definitely would wear, I don't do this, but he would always wear a collared shirt. Maybe not always a tie, but always a collared shirt.
Yep.
And so him, style icon, probably like Daiki Suzuki or any of the Engineer Garments folks, Angelo Urusha. I mean, I know he's not there anymore, but like anyone who's like been or touched that chain of greatness. And then who is it? Maybe like for looks, like Yves Saint Laurent, like the guy.
Right.
Because I would love to just one day like only wear like solid black and like deep navies and like look like I'm smart and have my shit together.
Well, Jeremy, thanks so much, man. This has been awesome. I hope to get back to New York City, like obviously sooner than later. And but yeah, would love to get together in the flesh.
For sure.
But I really appreciate you taking the time, man. This was fun for me.
Of course, yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Jeremy once again for taking the time to do this episode. Had an absolute blast learning more about him, and I hope you guys did as well. I'd like to thank Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for the theme track as always, as well as Clear Audio for the noise canceling headphones. Thanks so much for listening, and look after yourselves.